They thought he couldn't see. They thought he couldn't hear. To them, he was a man stripped of his power, a billionaire humbled by sudden blindness. His wife whispered sharp words under her breath. His children laughed behind his back, and the people closest to him treated his weakness like a free ticket to greed. They believed the man who once commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will had become nothing more than a helpless shadow. But what they didn't know was that every cruel laugh, every deceitful word, every selfish act was being recorded. He sat there in silence, hands folded, listening as the truth spilled out around him, unseen and unheard, or so they thought. And when the world discovered what really happened in that house, nothing would ever be the same again. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Adrian Cole was a man whose name carried weight in every boardroom across the country. For decades, he built an empire from the ground up, transforming a small logistics company into a global powerhouse that fed thousands of families. At 61, he had everything most men only dream of: private jets, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, and the admiration of his peers. But beyond the headlines and the shimmering lifestyle, Adrian's true desire was far simpler. He longed to know that his family, the people he had sacrificed everything for, loved him for the man he was, not just for the fortune attached to his name. That quiet yearning would set the stage for the most shocking test of loyalty any billionaire had ever attempted. Vanessa Cole was the kind of woman people noticed before she even spoke. Tall, elegant, and always dressed in the latest couture, she seemed to embody perfection. To outsiders, she was the flawless partner of a self-made mogul, the woman who hosted charity galas and smiled effortlessly for cameras. But those who lived under the same roof knew another side: her hunger for status, her obsession with appearances, and her unshakable belief that the Cole empire was hers as much as her husband's. Alongside her stood their children: Marcus, sharp and ambitious, constantly chasing his father's approval, and Lila, a free spirit more drawn to luxury than responsibility. To Adrian, they were his pride and his legacy. Yet hidden beneath their polished exteriors, cracks had already begun to form. The breaking point came one autumn evening when Adrian announced that he had been in a terrible car accident. Rumors spread quickly. Business rivals whispered that the Titan had finally met his downfall. What the world didn't know, and what only Adrian himself understood, was that the blindness was a lie. It was a carefully staged deception, a test so bold it would strip away every mask. He wanted to know once and for all who loved him when the empire no longer shielded him. In the mansion where he once commanded absolute respect, Adrian now played the role of a frail, sightless man, and what his family did next would haunt him forever. In the weeks that followed his so-called accident, Adrian moved slowly through the mansion, a cane in his hand, dark glasses covering his eyes. To everyone else, he appeared broken, defeated, dependent. But to Vanessa, this was an opportunity. Late at night, when she thought he had retreated to his study, she whispered to her closest friends over the phone. "The empire will be mine," she boasted, her voice laced with pride. "Adrian can't even pour himself a glass of water without help. The board will have no choice but to put me in charge." With each cruel word, Adrian's heart grew heavier. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had built his life with, was preparing to strip away everything he had built. He sat in silence, recording every word in his mind, wondering if her love had ever been real. But Vanessa wasn't the only one revealing her true nature. Marcus, their eldest child, grew more impatient with each passing day. He came into Adrian's study with stacks of legal papers, his voice calm but his intentions sharp. "Dad, all you need to do is sign," Marcus urged. "It's routine. I'll handle the details." To a man who couldn't see, the ink on the page meant nothing, but to Marcus those signatures meant control. In hushed conversations with associates, Marcus was already plotting to dismantle parts of the empire, selling off divisions for quick cash, building his own fortune on the ashes of his father's legacy. He thought his father's blindness made him weak. What he didn't know was that Adrian's mind was sharper than ever, memorizing every demand, every attempt at manipulation, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then came the words that cut the deepest, not from his wife, not from his son, but from his daughter. Lila, once the apple of his eye, dismissed him with a single sentence. "He's a burden now," she told a friend over brunch, laughter echoing through the dining hall. Just a shadow of who he was. To Adrian, those words burned more than any betrayal of wealth or business. They were a betrayal of the bond between a father and his child. The little girl he once carried on his shoulders, the young woman whose future he had dreamed of protecting, now saw him as nothing more than an obstacle. His silence grew heavier, his heart colder, and yet he remained still, for they believed he was powerless. But while they thought he was powerless, Adrian was listening. In the coldness of his own home, where love had turned to greed and loyalty had crumbled into whispers, Adrian found light in an unexpected place. Maria, the longtime housemaid, had been with the family for over 20 years. She knew Adrian before the empire grew vast, back when the Cole name meant little outside a modest office building. Unlike the others, she didn't see him as broken or weak. Each morning, she greeted him warmly, guiding him gently to the breakfast table, helping him eat with patience, speaking to him with the same respect she always had. There was no mockery in her voice, no hunger for control in her eyes, only kindness. To Adrian, her care was like water in a desert, a reminder that loyalty still existed, even in the smallest corners of his world. But Adrian, cautious and calculating, needed certainty. If he was to uncover the truth about those closest to him, he had to test even the one person who still seemed loyal. One afternoon, he deliberately left an envelope thick with cash half hidden on his study desk. He asked Maria to fetch him a glass of water, and when she returned, the envelope remained untouched. Later, he dropped hints of weakness, asking if he should entrust her with managing small household accounts. Rather than exploiting his trust, Maria declined, gently insisting, "Your family should guide you, Mr. Cole. I am here to serve, not to take what isn't mine." In those words, Adrian found the clarity he had been searching for. While Vanessa, Marcus, and Lila each revealed the ugliness of their hearts, Maria stood as proof that loyalty could still exist without wealth or inheritance attached to it. She was not perfect, but she was honest. And in her honesty, Adrian found a quiet ally he had never expected. What Maria didn't know was that her small acts of kindness, her steady devotion, were being noted by a man preparing for a storm. The empire was shifting beneath their feet, and soon the truth would erupt with devastating force. Maria had no idea she was about to become the key to exposing everything. As Adrian sat quietly in the library, the sound of laughter echoed faintly down the hallways. Vanessa had grown bold in her betrayal. No longer content with whispers to her friends, she now entertained private meetings with the family's longtime lawyer, a man who once swore loyalty to Adrian himself. Behind closed doors, their conversations blended business with something far more personal. Vanessa spoke of restructuring the empire, rewriting wills, and positioning herself as the rightful head of the Cole fortune. The lawyer, enticed by promises of wealth and power, leaned closer, both professionally and romantically. Every stolen glance, every whispered plan, painted a picture of disloyalty so deep it left Adrian's heart aching. Yet he remained still, blind in their eyes, but silently memorizing every move. They believed the empire was theirs for the taking. They couldn't see that the man they conspired against was already steps ahead. Marcus, ever ambitious, had grown restless. Nights once spent seeking his father's approval were now consumed by hushed phone calls and coded emails. In hidden corners of the mansion, He used his laptop to move large sums into offshore accounts, disguising transactions under shell companies. To him, this was the beginning of his independence, the moment he would break free from his father's shadow. He told himself it was survival, a preparation for when the empire eventually crumbled. But beneath that reasoning lay greed, an eagerness to claim wealth that was never his. Adrian, however, had anticipated moves like these. Unknown to Marcus, the accounts were being tracked, the transfers carefully noted. While his son thought he was outsmarting a blind old man, Adrian was quietly documenting every keystroke, every betrayal, waiting for the moment when the truth would come crashing down. And then there was Lila. While Vanessa schemed with lawyers and Marcus chased secret fortunes, she sought validation in extravagance. Shopping sprees stretched into nights of reckless parties, each dollar spent justified with one cruel phrase: "Father's a burden now, he doesn't need any of this." With every swipe of her card, she flaunted wealth as if it were infinite, her father's blindness reduced to nothing more than an excuse to live without restraint. Luxury cars, designer jewelry, and endless nights of indulgence became her rebellion against the discipline Adrian had once tried to instill. To the outside world, she was a socialite enjoying her inheritance early. But to Adrian, each headline, each whispered rumor of her excess, was another cut to the legacy he had worked a lifetime to build. They believed he was powerless, blind to it all. But Adrian had been preparing for this moment for years. By now, the house had become a stage for greed. Every smile was a mask, every conversation a hidden plot. But Adrian was not the helpless man they believed him to be. In the stillness of night, he quietly moved through his study, fingers grazing the outlines of tiny recording devices he had ordered months before the so-called accident. Under the cover of blindness, he placed them carefully, in the dining room, the library, even in the corners of his bedroom where hushed whispers often lingered. Each device was small, invisible, impossible for his family to suspect. The man they mocked was now watching, listening, gathering every piece of evidence he would one day need. To them he was a shadow. In truth, he was the hunter, and they were already trapped in his web of patience. Soon, the recordings brought Adrian the truth in its rawest form. Late one evening, as Vanessa sipped wine with a confidant, her voice grew sharp. "He's useless now," she sneered, a shell of the man he once was. Each syllable cut like glass. In another room, Marcus spoke with a colleague, his tone dripping with ambition. "The board won't wait long. Once he's out of the picture, the empire is mine." And Lila, in her careless way, laughed about her father's condition, dismissing him as an inconvenience. The walls that had once echoed with family dinners and laughter now carried only betrayal. For Adrian, every cruel word was both pain and proof, another stone in the fortress he was quietly building. They thought their secrets were safe. They never realized their voices were being captured in the silence they had mistaken for weakness. Yet Adrian could not fight this battle alone. He needed someone he could trust, someone who had proven loyalty when everyone else failed. One evening, as Maria carefully helped him to his chair, he leaned closer and whispered the truth. He told her the blindness was an act, the recordings real, and the betrayals deeper than she could imagine. At first, Maria's hands trembled, shocked at the revelation. But then she looked at the man she had served faithfully for decades and nodded with quiet resolve. "I will help you, Mr. Cole," she whispered. From that moment on, Maria was no longer just a housemaid. She became his silent partner, his eyes and ears when he could not move freely. The plan was no longer his alone. It was theirs. If you're still watching to this point, type, "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's following every shocking twist. The trap was set. The question was, who would betray him first? The pressure mounted as Vanessa grew restless with waiting. No longer content with whispered promises and secret meetings, she stormed into Adrian's study one evening, her voice sharp and demanding. "You need to sign these documents," she insisted, sliding papers across his desk. "The company needs stability, and in your condition, you can't provide it." To the blind man before her, the words carried the weight of care, but beneath them was only ambition. She wanted control, not to preserve his legacy, but to claim it as her own. Adrian sat motionless, his fingers grazing the edges of the unsigned papers. He listened to her arguments, her frustrations, her growing sense of entitlement, all while recording every word. She believed his silence was weakness. In truth, it was a shield, buying him time. Vanessa thought victory was within reach, but she was playing into his hands with every demand she made. Not long after, Marcus revealed his own desperation. Unlike his mother, who masked her ambition with strategy, Marcus's greed came raw and unfiltered. Late at night, he entered Adrian's room, pacing nervously as he spoke. "Dad, I can't wait for what's coming. I need my share now. The inheritance, it's mine as much as yours. Give me what I deserve before it's too late." His voice cracked with impatience, his tone shifting between pleading and threatening. To Adrian, every word confirmed what he had begun to suspect. His son did not want to build the empire, he only wanted to consume it. The boy he once raised to follow in his footsteps was now trying to push him out of his own legacy. Adrian remained quiet, letting Marcus believe the pressure was working, but every plea, every careless admission was another nail in the coffin of his son's deception. If Vanessa and Marcus were plotting in shadows, Lila's betrayal unfolded under the blinding lights of extravagance. One evening, she filled the mansion with strangers, music blaring, glasses clinking, money flowing like water. She laughed as luxury cars lined the driveway and designer gowns swept through the halls. To her, it was a celebration of freedom, financed by the father she dismissed as a burden. Adrian sat in the corner, blindfolded by pretense, humiliated in his own home. The mansion he built as a sanctuary for family had become a stage for his daughter's careless indulgence. Guests whispered, mocking the once great tycoon reduced to silence while his fortune was paraded before them. Every note of laughter, every careless toast to his downfall, stung deeper than words. They believed they were winning, blind to the storm they had unleashed. They thought they were winning, but their greed was about to destroy them. At last, the moment arrived. Adrian called for a family gathering in the grand hall of the mansion. Vanessa entered first, her expression sharp, certain that her years of patience were about to pay off. Marcus followed, dressed in confidence, convinced his inheritance would be announced. And Lila, careless as ever, strutted in with a glass of champagne, believing the night would cement her freedom from responsibility. They sat before him, whispering to one another, trading smug glances. Around them, extended family members, close business partners, and even trusted staff filled the room, curious about the billionaire's announcement. Vanessa leaned toward Marcus and Lila, her voice dripping with triumph. "Tonight, everything becomes ours." To them, this was the moment when Adrian's power would finally slip into their hands. But to Adrian, it was the moment he had been preparing for, the final move in a game they didn't know they were playing. The room fell silent as Adrian rose slowly from his chair. For months, he had been the frail, blind man they mocked. But now he lifted his hand and removed the dark glasses that had hidden his eyes. Gasps spread through the hall as his gaze swept across the room, sharp, piercing, unbroken. "I was never blind," he said, his voice steady, commanding. Shock rippled across Vanessa's face. Marcus stiffened in his seat, and Lila nearly dropped her glass. Before they could speak, Adrian pressed a button, and the room filled with their own voices. Vanessa calling him useless, Marcus demanding his inheritance, Lila laughing at his condition. Each recording echoed like thunder, leaving no room for denial. Guests turned, horrified, watching the family unravel in real time. The empire they believed was theirs collapsed in an instant, not through Adrian's weakness, but through their own greed. Their reputations, their masks were destroyed forever. When the final recording ended, silence gripped the room. Every guest stared at Vanessa, Marcus, and Lila, faces pale, reputations shattered. Adrian stood taller than he had in years, no longer the broken man they believed him to be, but the father, the builder, the empire himself. Slowly, he drew out a sealed envelope. Inside was his newly rewritten will. With calm authority, he declared that Maria, the one person who had shown true loyalty, would inherit a large portion of his fortune, ensuring her future would be secure. Vanessa and the children, however, were cut off. Their greed had written their own fate. Gasps filled the room as the reality sank in. Vanessa collapsed into her chair, overcome with shame. Marcus stormed out in fury, his plans crumbling before his eyes. Lila fell to her knees, tears streaming, begging her father for forgiveness. But Adrian, though pained, stayed firm. Some wounds cut too deep to be healed with words. In that moment, Adrian made peace with the truth. Wealth could build empires, but it could also reveal the heart. He had tested his family, and they had failed. Not because he sought to punish them, but because he needed to know where true loyalty lived. The answer had been there all along, in the quiet devotion of someone who expected nothing in return. Betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it's the ones closest to us, but in the end, truth always sees, even in the dark. What do you think? Was Adrian too harsh on his family, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let us know in the comments, and if this story hit you like it did us, hit that like button. It helps us reach more people, and subscribe if you want more gripping stories every day.